Hey friends, my name is Erin and I'm going to be doing a February-March wrap-up. I didn't get to a wrap-up in February because I wasn't feeling it, and so I'm just going to combine last month's books with this month's books because I did read a few good ones and I'd love to just kind of show you what I've read. For each book, I'm just going to give my real quick rundown of a 1 or 2 sentence summary, the best thing, the worst thing, my rating, and who might like this book. I'm going to go through these in the order that I read them. I did read 2 NetGalley arcs, so I may look a little bit closer at those. Alright, first up I have The Lost Symbol. This is by Dan Brown. This is book number 3 in like the Angels and Demons series. In this book we follow Professor Langdon. He's trying to solve some ancient mysteries and save his best friend, all while the CIA is working with him, against him, who knows. The best thing about this book is that it's always fun to follow some of those mysteries, trying to figure out what clues you've seen so far, solving the puzzles as you go along. My least favorite thing about this one specifically is that some of the clues seemed a little bit more ambiguous and we didn't get quite as much mystery. It just didn't seem like the puzzles were up to par with some of the other ones that I've read in this series. So I ended up giving it a 3.5 rating on Goodreads. Actually, not on Goodreads, on Storygraph. And I think you would like it if you do like thought-provoking mysteries, because this is a good mix of solving puzzles, but also considering life and humanity. Alright, book number 2 was Heartbreak for Hire. It was one of my NetGalley arcs, and in this we have Brinkley, and she breaks hearts for a living with 4 other girls, but she starts to question that job when one of the guys she's supposed to get revenge on shows up to work with her. I will say for this NetGalley, one of the best things was that there was a lot of growth for the character, the main character, and the romance. I actually liked the main guy as the romance. However, I thought there were a lot of problems with this book. The main characters were all really aggressively one-word personalities. They all had their one characteristics and they stuck with it for most of the book, and it came off really harsh to the point where at the beginning I wasn't sure I was going to finish this book. So it is a rough start. I will say that by like 30-40% it got better, but it was a rough start. Also, the CEO of the company that they work for is super manipulative and doesn't really get the consequences that she deserves, and so I don't know that I 100% agree with where this book ended up. I did end up giving it a 2.5, I think. At the beginning, I thought it was going to be probably a 1 star, but there were some really funny rom-com feel scenes that elevated the book, and you can tell by the end that it did try and come around. I think it tried to get its message across. I don't think it got there. I also bought and read The Princess Trap by Talia Hibbert because I love Talia Hibbert. She's one of my new favorite authors, and I want to read everything she's written. So we have Cherry, and she meets Ruben and just wants to have a little fun, but they get caught by the paparazzi, and she learns that he is a prince in disguise and needs her help. Of course, the best way she can help is pretending to be his fiance. You got that fake dating, fake fiance, marriage of convenience trope. One of the best parts is the romance. It's just the right amount of steamy. It also covers some pretty harsh topics towards the end and does a good job of wrapping those up in the short novella that we have. I think the worst part was that it was too short and a little bit unbelievable because of that. You had to have a lot of things and trust and feelings happen in that short amount of time. I ended up giving it a 3.75, and if you like romance, you're gonna like this. After that, I went into a graphic novel. This is A Study in Emerald by Neil Gaiman. Here we have a veteran and a private eye who team up to solve an otherworldly mystery. I was pretty excited because it was Neil Gaiman, and I definitely love the Sherlock Holmes vibe in this. I don't feel like it was a full story. I was a little bit disappointed, especially because it is Neil Gaiman, and I wanted more depth. It was just a surface level mystery, and there were some alien and otherworld things that were never explained, and I wanted an explanation. So I think, again, it suffered from being too short in this graphic novel form. I don't think there's any follow-ups to this, but I could be wrong. Maybe it's the first one in a series and that's why I'm confused, because it feels like it should be the first one in a series, but I don't think it is. So I ended up giving it a middle of the road 3.5. If you do like those Sherlock Holmes mysteries and want a graphic novel format, this could be a good one though. I followed that up with my other graphic novel for the month, The Adventure Zone, Murder at the Rockport Limited. This follows the McElroy brothers as they play D&D, and on this one, there's a murder mystery on a train. The sass in these characters is probably my favorite part. If you have listened to the podcast, you know that some parts get left out. So I would definitely recommend listening to the podcast because you get even more of the hilarity that this family brings to the table. So the worst part of this for me is that you lose some of that in book format. However, they make up for it with the cool art. Again, another great art style. And one of my favorite parts is at the back, they have a bunch of fan arts. I give this a 4.5 on Storygraph, and if you like D&D, you'll love these graphic novels. Next up on my list for February was Journey to the Center of the Earth by Jules Verne. This short little book took me a surprisingly long time. I didn't enjoy it. Like the title says, we have a professor and his nephew that head down to the center of the Earth once they find a map to lead them there. The best part was the description of the setting. As you're going down into the earth, you get a lot of details, and so you can really picture what's happening really well. The worst part was that it was slow and a little boring. I don't think it holds up to today's adventures that we see, fantasy or otherwise. I can see why it was probably cool back in the day, but some of the big things that happen in this book are minuscule compared to the big things that we see in literature today. And so I just was bored. I will be unhauling that. If you like scientific discoveries and kind of a journal feel, I think you would like this book. It just wasn't for me. I followed that up with one I was really excited about to kind of get me out of my slump, and that was Pride by E.B. Zeboy. This is a Pride and Prejudice retelling that follows the story of teens and gentrification, and of course, Mr. Darcy. This was a really cute romance and a good retelling that still had the main aspects of Jane Austen, but a totally modern feel. I think I did want more from the romance because that's one of the things you love in a Jane Austen retelling. While it was believable and fun, I wasn't super tied to those two main characters. I do think it did a good job of touching on some harder topics in a lighter setting and doing a good balance of both. I gave this an even 4-star rating, and if you like Jane Austen, this is a good retelling. Okay, after that I finished my big boy, which I had been reading all month, and that was Fires of Heaven by Robert Jordan. This is the 5th book in the Wheel of Time, so I can't really tell you too much about it, but I will tell you that the gang of characters that you've met in the first few books are fighting some high-level bad guys in this one. And there are more cliffhangers and surprise endings in this one than I think any of the others so far. Again, I did a lot of tabbing. My book did get wet. So I'm going to order a new one of these because I need it. The ending was my favorite part. I think Another Long Middle was probably my least favorite part, but this one felt more worth it than some of the others I've read so far. I gave this a 4.5, and if you love epic fantasies, this could be a series that you want to check out. Alright, I read 2 more books in February. The next one up is Unchosen. This is another NetGalley arc. We have a middle child who feels lost in the middle of her 2 sisters. One's a badass leader, and one is the chosen one, and she's just kind of sitting in the middle during this apocalyptic meltdown that the world is going through until she makes a bold move. This book also had a good romance that had a great slow build from enemies to friends to romance, and there were some really good reveals in this book. Some of them you saw coming, but they were still super satisfying. I think the worst part about this one is that the action scenes struggled a little bit. I had a hard time picturing exactly what was happening when they were describing the action scenes, and so it lost a little bit of that hardcore aspect that I was really looking for. I did give this a 4-star rating, and of the 2 NetGalley arcs that I read, And of most of the NetGalley arcs that I've read, this is the one that I would definitely recommend the most, especially if you loved those good old YA dystopian. I think this is a modern version of those that holds its own. And the last book that I read in February was The Year of the Secret Assignments by Jacqueline Moriarty. This is a reread for me. It's one that I got a long time ago, I think in high school, and have reread several times because it's just one of those feel-good books for me. You follow kids in high school and a pen pal project that leads to a lot of shenanigans and some romance. The author gives you such a quirky writing style that after page 3, you're immediately in love with the main characters. I do think a lot of the characters feel very similar, but the writing style that they have is so good that you are okay with it. It's also not the most believable high school book, but again, it's just so fun. I can't help but love it. I initially gave this probably 5-star when I read it the first time. I think it's probably more of a high 3, low 4-star. If you like YA romance or YA contemporaries, this is a good book. Let's move into March. Now for March, I had the Tropical Readathon. I started with The Miserable Mill. This is the series of unfortunate events, book 4, and it counted for my absent parent trope in the Tropical Readathon. In this book, we have 3 orphans that get forced to work at a lumberyard mill and hypnotized by the evil Count Olaf. I would say it's good to see the kids again after having a break from between book 3 and 4, but I do feel this is the weakest of the 4 that I've read so far. I gave it a 3.5 rating, and you would like the series if you want something short and dreary. Sometimes you're just in the mood for a little misery. I followed that up with The Heart of Betrayal by Mary Pearson, and this counted for my enemies to lovers trope. So this is book 2, and we have the prince and the princess stuck in the assassin's realm, and they have to rely on their lies to survive. I really loved the focus on the assassin and the main bad guy in this. He was a pretty good, decent bad guy, one that you could kind of start to see yourself siding with and then realize that, oh wait, he's evil. I didn't like this book as much as the first. It just had a very different feel to it, and it seemed a lot more surface level. I didn't like the main romance as much as I had in the first one, and I think I actually want the main girl to end up with a totally different character, which is not how I wanted to feel by the end of this book. So I did give it 3.25 stars on Storygraph, and if you like YA romances, again, this could be a good series. The first one, definitely worth checking out. The middle one's a little iffy. We'll see how it ends. I went from that into Julie of the Wolves by Jean Craighead George. We have Julie in this book who runs away from a forced arranged marriage and gets lost on the tundra and adopted by a pack of wolves. I think the best part about this was the incredible detail. I don't know much about the way of life of the groups of people talked about in this book, so I don't know how accurate that representation is, but when she's on the tundra living on her own, she gives a lot of really good detail about the plants, the animals, and how you survive. I think it suffered a little bit from a slow plot, and I did not like the ending. I don't think I'll be reading the books that come after this. I gave it, again, that middle of the road 3.5 because it was a good read, but nothing really stood out to make me fall in love with this book. If you like some of those wilderness survival books like Hatchet and My Side of the Mountain, this is a good one to follow up with. The Prince of the Pond by Judith Byron Schachner. During that in-between time of the prince getting cursed by the witch and the princess kissing the frog, goes through his life as a frog, learning to be a frog, learning how to speak as a frog, and actually falling in love with another little frog and raising little froglets. It was really cute. I think it was a good mix of a cute story and some like frog facts. But I don't really know what the audience for this book was because it talks about like frog mating and that kind of stuff. So elementary kids might have a hard time reading this, but I don't think it's meant for adults. So I don't know what the intended audience is, but I liked it. It was fun. I gave it a 3.75 rating, and if you like fairy tales, this is a cute little in-between to read. Alright, let's look at Lord of the Flies next, a book that has been on my shelf the longest. In this book, we have a group of boys that get stranded on a deserted island following a plane crash, and things go from bad to worse. It was a very interesting look at human nature and societies and how they are built to end fall, but I think it had a very abrupt ending, and that was my least favorite part about it. I did give it a 3.75 because I think I was a little slow in some spots, but if you want a deep dive look into humanity through a fun lens, this is a good classic. After that, I read Absolutely Normal Chaos by Sharon Creech, and this is about a girl who keeps a summer journal through grief and loss and first kisses. It was decent. I don't think it was anything standout. I gave it 3 stars. It did cover for those elementary kids some hard topics like grief with a lighter touch that you would want. I don't think anything stood out. It was just a book. I did follow that by 2 really good books. The first one was my tropical readathon book of a book that someone gave you to read, and that was The Black Company, The Chronicles. This is the first 3 books actually, and I do recommend reading the first 3 all together if you get them like this, because the first 3 do tie together. So we have an old group of sellswords who have been hardened by war and have been fighting by whoever hires them, good or evil, for so long that they don't know which way is up. The company is very unique. You fall in love with the characters, even though the beginning is a little crazy. It's all from a character's point of view called Croker. So if he doesn't know something, you don't know something. The writing style is super unique, and it can be a little bit tricky to get a hold of at first, but once you get into it, you learn to really appreciate it. I will say the lack of distinction between the characters, especially the descriptions, the lack of descriptions with the characters, I wanted a little bit more there, and sometimes, especially at the beginning, I was confused because you'd get a bunch of names, but there was no way to tell them apart because you never got a description for them. I think that alleviates itself eventually, not because you get more descriptions, but because you learn to love their actions. If you want a really gritty and true war setting, this is a good book. I followed that up with Illuminae by Jay Kristoff and Amy Kaufman. I was not prepared for this book. I know there are a lot of people who love it, and I had been told it was a sci-fi romance, which it is, but gosh, is it brutal in some parts. We have 2 kids who are about to graduate high school and trying to survive the destruction of their home planet and their breakup. It was surprisingly dark, and there were some hard decisions made. I mean, hard decision after hard decision that just broke your heart a little bit while still having an enjoyable reading method. It also has a ton of different styles of writing because it's a collection of information, like a file. And so it was really fun to read. The only thing that brought this book down was that the ending felt a little drawn out, so I did give it a 4.5 rating. If you like sci-fi with a good mix of dark and lights, this is perfect for you. The last book I read was Beloved by Toni Morrison. In this, our main protagonist has got her and her children away from their slave owners, and she is trying to survive the aftermath of being a slave, losing a daughter, not knowing where her husband is, and the judgment of her community for some of the things that she's done. I don't think I connected to the writing style, and Stream of Consciousness is really hit and miss for me. I really enjoyed the parts where it was telling me the story of the characters in this book, and then when the story started to get a little bit confusing and disjointed, it disconnected me from the book. It kind of threw me out of the enjoyment that I was getting before. But the stories that were told of the lives of the characters in these books were really incredibly deep and dark and honest. So I would still definitely recommend that people read this book for sure. I think it's an important book to be read, an important story being told. I'm going to hold up some of my favorites from the last few months so you can still get the stack. These ones would be the ones I officially recommend off this list, depending on what you like or don't like. I hope you have a great day. I hope you had a great month, and I'll see you later. Bye, guys.